This is Edible Economics, bringing you the important topics of our times as we turn noisy headlines into bite-sized issues you can actually digest. This program is for information only, not investment advice. Here's Andrew Tang.
One of the most common questions I ask my clients and colleagues are, is there an AI bubble? Is there an AI bubble to a point comparing to the dot-com bubble of the boom and bust? So in this episode, we will go through one, the history of the dot-com boom and bust, and what is circular investing? I'm sure you have heard that term quite a bit. And thirdly, we will go through data centers. What role did they play before and what role are they playing now? And then finally, we'll close with what are some of the winners and losers. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, first thing, let's talk about the history of the dot-com boom and bust. Okay, so if you recall, back in 1998, that's really when the market started going up for the dot-com boom, and it peaked sometime around March 2000. The S&P 500 was up roughly a little bit more than 200%, and the NASDAQ is up roughly close to 600%, something around 572%, somewhere around there. Now, all of that gain, right, they were reversed when the bubble popped. It took about 2.5 years to unfold. It helped by accounting fraud that were discovered and also September 11, right? So it ended in October. The S&P 500 was down about 49% and the NASDAQ tumbled somewhere around 78% with all that gain. Now, keep in mind, the boom was mainly about laying fiber optic cables and network. However, only 10 to 15% of that fiber were lit, right? And overall, that time was driven by speculations, high valuations by giving to companies by simply announcing digital strategies. So, for example, if you remember names like Pets.com, Webvan, telecom companies like Global Crossings, Northpoint, Communications, WorldCom, these are some of the names that were imploded back in the days. Now, why is this time different? Well, for one, if we look at the valuation, something that we use is called price to earnings ratio. So if we look at the trailing price to earning ratios of the S&P 500, back in the dot-com bubble, S&P had a PE ratio around 32, and the NASDAQ was sky high, had a PE ratio somewhere around 200. And now, the S&P 500, the PE ratio is somewhere around 31, and that's why people are concerned, because it's very close to the dot-com boom back then. And that is from trailing earnings, right? And if you look at the forward earnings, the S&P 500's PE ratio is somewhere around 22. Okay, so it's a little bit lower. And also for the NASDAQ, instead of having a PE of 200, right now the NASDAQ's PE ratio is only about somewhere around 35. And if you look at forward PE ratio, the NASDAQ PE ratio is somewhere around 25. Now, when it comes to funding the boom, right now with the AI boom and innovation and technology that is expanding the economy, it's really funded by companies with real earnings. Back then, it was mostly about speculations. Any company announcing strategy with a dot-com after its name, for example, were given lofty valuations, right? We also need to explain the different layers of AI as explained by the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang. So on top of what AI is, on the bottom of the layer, you have the layer of energy. You need energy in order to compute, to power the compute, and therefore the energy sector is also going through a boom. And then you have the chipset sector, the chipset layer. And obviously chipsets of the highest degree and the highest quality, they are always in demand. And that is very, very different from the fiber that were laid back in the dot-com bubble. And then the third layer is the cloud infrastructure. We need the cloud infrastructure to handle all the traffic and to deal with all the functionality before any of this AI can take place. And then on top of that, you have the application, the large language models. So you can see that the different layers are creating this boom. So it's not just particular one sector, but it's a multiple sector that is also going through this economic expansion. Keep in mind, only about 10 to 15% of the fiber laid during the dot-com bubble were lit. Comparing that in today, the highest demand are the chipsets, for example. There's actually a waiting list for people to rent these chips because they can't even afford it. And for those companies that can afford the latest and the greatest chips from NVIDIA, there's a huge backlog. So that is a huge difference there. And the yesteryears, you can say that the money that was funding the dot-com boom mostly were borrow money. But in today's time, you can see that the largest companies, they're actually having real earnings stemming from the bottom layer all the way to the top layer. So there is a huge difference between the two. Now let's talk about circular investing. What is circular investing? So what it is in the simpler form, or the simplest way of explaining it, is that company A invests in company B, while company B buys product from company A. So therefore it forms a circular relationship. And the most critical circular investing that we have heard is really between NVIDIA and OpenAI. So NVIDIA agreed to invest in OpenAI up to $100 billion, and in return, OpenAI is going to buy $100 billion worth of chips from NVIDIA. And why I think in this particular incident, I don't think circular investing is an issue here, because NVIDIA makes about $57 billion a quarter. So does NVIDIA really need OpenAI to prop up its numbers? I really think not. And I personally have heard from Jensen Huang, and I truly believe that Jensen believes in OpenAI and they really wanted to invest in the company and be part of that adventure, similar to many other Fortune 500 companies that are investing alongside or investing in OpenAI as well. And the third thing I want to talk about is data center. What are the functions of data center in the yesteryears and what are the functions now? So, for example, back in the dot-com boom and bust era, data centers were mainly providing the function of hosting, handling internet traffic, and providing bandwidth. Nowadays, internet centers are quite different because they're doing all of that. In addition, they are also providing compute, meaning they are actually generating intelligence. Now, what do you mean by that? Well, data center nowadays, thanks to the ability to compute, big data have morphed into artificial intelligence with the capability of compute, right? So data center not only handles the traffic, providing bandwidth and make sure that the website shows up in your device in time. In addition to all of that, the data center nowadays are actually handling the training and also inference, which is the working of the AI models, right? So what that means is that the data center, in addition to handling the traffic, also providing bandwidth, they're also needing to provide the compute in order to generate intelligence. And as a matter of fact, as of the end of 2024, most language model has actually run out of natural human data. So now they're actually generating synthetic data, and by training synthetic data, we are generating synthetic intelligence. So there's a huge difference between the yesteryear's data centers functions and today's data center functions. And because of that, according to Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA, is that we need to complete the transformation from general purpose computing for the data centers to accelerated computing. And by that, we don't see any kind of bubble forming, or I would say the probability of a bubble forming and popping is extremely low. And what is the ETA? What is the timeline for this transformation to complete? And according to Jensen, it's going to take about 2 to 3 years. So the question of, is there an AI bubble popping, forming? I say not exactly within this 2 to 3 years. Now, the fourth thing that I will talk about is who are some of the winners and losers, right? So for example, we can see that with the AI application, there is no need for specific software. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that outside of your main operating system, if you are able to run the AI will be able to replace any kind of specialty software. So for example, if you rely on a software to perform a specific function, the AI can actually replace that. So we're starting to see the software companies are selling off. Meanwhile, the chipset sector is actually continuous gain. So some of the winners, for example, it will be the chipset sectors. NVIDIA is one of them, obviously, Broadcom, AMD, and then there are some private companies, obviously, like Cerebras and ASIC chips. So the special purpose chips companies. Yeah, those chipset companies and that particular sector are seeing some decent gains. Also, don't forget the layers that are enabling this AI expansion or AI boom. So all those companies, from providing energy all the way to cloud computing, and don't forget cybersecurity, these are all important part of this AI boom. And then, of course, again, companies that are providing the large language models or that own and operate the language models. Now, some of the losers that I mentioned before belong in the software areas. And then also at a micro level, certain companies, individual companies, if they misuse their cash or overextend in terms of their investment, they can fall into trouble too. So in closing, these are some of the winners and losers. So I hope you find this episode helpful, and click the like button and hit the subscribe button if you want to hear more from me and get more content like this. So until then, I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.